As the push for a global society has increased, some countries are also seeing an increase in a nationalistic mindset. Globalization has had an enormous negative socioeconomic effect in developed countries, driving these sentiments to an all-time high. While the same can be seen in less developed countries that are feeling the effects of westernization. Nationalism can be described as the policy or doctrine of asserting the interests of one's own nation viewed as separate from the interests of other nations or the common interests of all nations. As we move forward into a more global society, where technology, transportation, and communications have brought us closer together now more than ever before, certain aspects of globalization have rekindled waves of nationalism throughout many countries, some developed and others on the brink of becoming industrialized nations. There are changes happening around the world, caused by socioeconomic developments that directly drive some cultures into feeling threatened due to the encroachment of a westernized mindset. Developed countries are feeling the economic changes due to lost manufacturing as industries move to other countries that offer lower labor costs. This brings out feelings of national pride and, to a certain extent, racism and prejudice against other countries and ethnic groups. From the standpoint of the developing countries, though economic growth is a positive change, it leaves many people in those same countries feeling that new industries controlled by foreign corporations will influence and change their society and cultural integrity. These aspects affect us all from the standpoint of economics, sociology, and anthropology, or more precisely, our culture. Globalization has increased the feelings of nationalism and protectionism, and it may create a major divide between industrialized and underdeveloped countries. Human societies were developed around family and small groups directly related to each other. Territorial disputes have fueled wars since the beginning of mankind. An example of this is the ongoing struggle of the Palestinian people in trying to become an independent nation without Israeli control. This struggle began right after Israel chose Palestine as the location for their newly founded country, and it does not show signs that it will ever end. Even today, disputes between neighbors occur every single day. Our primitive instincts are what drive our thoughts in nationalism, protectionism, and separatism, which may always stay with us. Professor Lechner, a professor of sociology at Emory College, describes globalization as a compression of the world as well as an intensification of consciousness of the whole world. He also describes how globalization received a boost around the 17th century due to European expansionism. He then proceeds to describe the shaping of main reference points of what he calls fully globalized order, which are individual self, the nation state, world system of societies, and finally humanity. Professor Lechner expands on the compression statement with the thought that in a compressed world, the comparison of different views and religious traditions can lead to cultural conflict. This conflict can therefore become a source or justification for extreme views and a resurgence, in his opinion, of fundamental groups. He also states that a globalized world is integrated but not necessarily harmonious and prone to fragmentation. Countries across Europe are seeing an increase in right-wing votes. Workers in industrialized nations are seeing globalization as a threat to their jobs and their ability to provide for their families. This is probably the main driver of an increased feeling of protectionism, which is defining in economics as the practice of fostering or developing domestic industries by protecting them from foreign competition through duties or quotas imposed on importations. These importations don't necessarily need to be a product. They can also be foreign workers. Sweden, a very open-minded country in general, has seen an increase of 13% in right-wing votes. The same can be seen occurring in France, Germany, and the UK. The sentiment is similar in many other areas, even in the United States. Anti-immigrant sentiment has increased. Politicians argue the need for tighter control of our borders, though at the same time, these same politicians have a vested interest in the export of jobs to other countries, since they are shareholders in the corporations that are creating new jobs in underdeveloped countries. Fundamentalism today is used to describe groups of people, primarily Muslims, that stick to their moral and religious beliefs, which is also on the rise in less developed countries, specifically in areas such as the Middle East and Asia. Less developed countries and traditional Muslim countries are seeing Western culture as an intrusion on their beliefs and way of life. Traditional religious beliefs are feeling the pressure of free speech and new ideas, which creates conflict within their countries. Many of these countries block the availability of the internet so that their citizens are not aware of developments throughout the world. Gideon Rachman, chief foreign affairs columnist for the Financial Times since 2006, provides interesting thoughts and information regarding globalization and the resurgence of nationalism. He remarks about the fact that with the emergence of global communications, in particular the internet, borders are no longer important. He also remarks that the fact that with this global mindset moving forward, it seems like somebody must have forgotten to tell local voters and politicians in general that national identity and borders don't matter. Case in point, the vote that took place September 2014, where 45% of the population in Scotland voted to separate from Great Britain. Nationalism is on the rise in Europe, and Rachman notes how the most dangerous nationalist of them all is Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, who already annexed Crimea and is threatening Ukraine at the moment. He then proceeds to describe the increase of nationalist politicians within Western European countries, such as France and Germany, with Marine Le Pen leading France's National Front and Germany's so-called Alternative for Germany, which advocates that German interests have become subordinated to those of the European community. Europeans are also seeing an influx of refugees from countries torn by poverty and war. This wave of refugees is partly to blame for the feeling of insecurity that permeates through most Western European countries, which may be creating a backlash against immigration, as well as making residents aware of the effects of open borders. Many countries are seeing a resurgence or increase in separatist movements. Separatism is the advocacy of a state of cultural, ethnic, religious, or governmental separation from a larger group. Besides the recent Scottish referendum, there are many other examples of separatism. Kosovo is now an independent country after breaking away from Serbia. Catalonia in Spain still maintains their own language and is threatening to separate from Spain. Bavaria in Germany has their own separatist movement as well. Cultural aspects of each country are being guarded with an increased intensity in order to preserve their culture and independence. Increased nationalistic pride or patriotism is seen as a need to maintain the way of life we have become accustomed to. Developed countries are seeing a loss of jobs which increases the anti-immigration feelings, prejudice against other ethnic groups, and sometimes full-blown racism. Professor Nouriel Roubini describes how the financial crisis of 2008 may have made many people aware that globalization, with its freedom to move goods, services, and technology, also has created a feeling of nationalism and protectionism. This may take place in many forms, with some of them being anti-immigration measures, as seen throughout Europe and even the United States. It makes the point that a weak economy promotes protectionism, policies, and attitudes. Foreign trade and foreign workers become targets of anger and blame for the slow growth of jobs and salaries. Roubini also notes that as the rich get richer, the poor become stagnant financially, which leads to insecurity of what he calls a mostly white underclass, which feels threatened by immigration and global trade in general. This, in turn, drives groups such as the Tea Party to promote characteristics such as protectionism, isolationism, and anti-immigration feelings. Gail Tverberg, an actuarial by trade, brings up other negative aspects of globalization with a slew of information, charts, and numbers to demonstrate that economists are guided by flawed concepts that are not realistic as we live in a finite world. Her charts describe China's energy consumption, where she demonstrates that the increase of industry in China has driven the usage of fossil fuels upwards. This increase is seen mostly in the coal consumption, which also has the highest level of negative effects due to release of high levels of carbon dioxide. The rising shift in manufacturing to underdeveloped countries also increases the numbers of people that can afford private transportation, therefore higher demand for oil, causing a price increase. Gale also states globalization has the added effects of transferring jobs from developed to less developed countries, once again driving the feelings of nationalism and protectionism. Globalization is a trend that will continue for a long time. It is not void of negative aspects that may, unless dealt with, influence the forward progress that has taken place so far. Economic growth may be happening in some parts of the world, but other areas are losing their ground. This brings about social issues created by the need of countries to protect their own workers and income, while at the same time adding to a need for individuality and a search for cultural independence. In conclusion, globalization, from an economic standpoint, has many positive aspects that may bring most countries to a stable economic state, though the negative aspects cannot be ignored. There has been a tremendous loss of jobs in many developed countries, which has created resentment towards not only the corporations that are driving globalization, but also against the countries that are seen as reaping the benefits, countries such as China and Thailand, for example. These feelings of resentment are the root of nationalistic movements in many countries. Other negative influences of globalization are an increase in pollution by countries that do not follow the same guidelines as developed countries, and which affect us all in the end. This again influences feelings of protectionism and fundamentalism. People in general are afraid of change and will fight to maintain their own cultural beliefs. This may be the hardest obstacle in creating a global society. Thank you.